The Silent Resistance. The Valkyrie Imperium had ruled the known galaxy for over 8,000 years. Their domain stretched across 17 spiral arms, encompassing nearly 40,000 star systems and hundreds of sentient species. Their technology was unmatched, their military unchallenged, and their rule absolute. When the Valkyrie discovered a new inhabited world, the process was always the same: swift conquest, resource extraction, and subjugation of the native population. No species had successfully resisted the Valkyrie in over 3 millennia. The last to try, the crystalline Morax of the Cygnus Arm, had been made an example of. Their homeworld was now an asteroid field. So when Valkyrie scouts discovered Earth in the 2140s, the outcome seemed predetermined. Humans were classified as a Category 3 civilization, industrial, pre-FTL, and utterly defenseless against a galactic power. The initial invasion followed standard protocol: orbital bombardment of military installations, neutralization of command structures, and establishment of administrative zones in strategic locations. But something went wrong. Commander Ilara Hayes stood at the viewport of the captured Valkyrie scout ship, watching Earth grow smaller as they accelerated toward the outer solar system. Her weathered face reflected in the glass, lines etched deep by months of sleepless nights and desperate battles. At 43, she had once been a NATO Special Forces operator. Now she led what remained of humanity's organized resistance. "Jump calculations complete, Commander," said Lieutenant Chen, his fingers dancing over the alien controls that had been partially modified with human interfaces. "We can make the jump in 30 seconds. Hayes nodded. "Do it." The stolen Valkyrie vessel contained something far more valuable than its FTL drive. It carried data, intelligence that might explain why the Valkyrie invasion had stalled, why Earth hadn't already become another conquered world in their vast empire. "Commander," called Specialist Rodriguez from her station, "I've decrypted more of the Valkyrie tactical assessments. You need to see this." Hayes moved to the central holotable, where a projection of various Valkyrie reports floated in their angular script, translated by the AI systems they'd salvaged from a downed command ship. "There, confused," Rodriguez said, highlighting sections of text. "Listen to this. Human resistance patterns defy standard behavioral models. Subject species demonstrates non-hierarchical combat adaptation at unprecedented rates." Hayes leaned closer. "What does that mean in plain English?" Dr. Emily Chen, the team's xenobiologist, joined them at the table. "It means they don't understand why we're not behaving like every other species they conquered. The Valkyrie expect resistance to collapse once they eliminate leadership structures. Their entire conquest model is based on it. But we kept fighting," Hayes said. "Not just fighting," Dr. Chen corrected. "Adapting. Look at this assessment from their high command. Tactical analysis indicates human combat methodologies evolve within 3 to 5 planetary rotations following introduction of new Imperium technologies or strategies." Hayes felt a thin smile form. "They're saying we learn too quickly." "Precisely," Dr. Chen said. "The Valkyrie evolutionary path created a rigidly hierarchical species. Their strength comes from perfect coordination under central command. But they're slow to adapt without explicit orders from superiors. While we evolved as tribal hunter-gatherers who survived through creativity and cooperation," Dr. Chen finished. "When you cut off one human resistance cell from others, it doesn't stop functioning, it innovates." The ship shuddered as it prepared for the jump. Hayes gripped the edge of the holotable. 10 seconds to jump," Lieutenant Chen announced. Hayes looked around at her crew. 15 humans operating stolen alien technology, headed toward a rendezvous with other resistance ships near Jupiter's orbit. 6 months ago, they'd been ordinary people: a high school physics teacher, a construction worker, a paramedic. Now they were humanity's best hope. "This isn't just about survival anymore," Hayes said quietly. "We may have actually found their weakness." The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines as the ship entered FTL. 3 months later, Hayes stood in the command center of Resistance Base Olympus, carved into the ice of Europa. Around her, dozens of humans worked at stations monitoring communications, coordinating operations, and analyzing Valkyrie movements. What had begun as a desperate guerrilla resistance had evolved into something more organized, more dangerous. Major Jackson, her tactical officer, approached with a datapad. The Valkyrie are pulling forces from the Asian occupation zone. Looks like they're consolidating around their main command centers. Hayes nodded. They're adapting to our tactics. Finally. Too little, too late, Jackson said with a grim smile. Operation Trojan is ready. Hayes felt a weight settle in her chest. Operation Trojan represented their biggest gamble yet. Using captured Valkyrie communication protocols, they had inserted false intelligence suggesting a major resistance stronghold in the Himalayan region. The Valkyrie, true to their nature, had dispatched a massive force to crush it. What they'll find instead is nothing but automated defenses and a lot of questions, Hayes said. Meanwhile, we hit their North American command center with everything we've got. It's a good plan, Jackson said, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. But we're still outnumbered and outgunned. Even with their forces divided, we're talking about technology thousands of years beyond ours. If they adapt faster than we anticipate, they won't, interrupted Dr. Chen, joining them with her own datapad. I've completed my analysis of their neural physiology. The Valkyrie brain physically cannot process rapid situational changes without reverting to established protocols. Their rigid hierarchy isn't just cultural, it's biological. Hayes studied the schematics on Chen's datapad, cross-sections of Valkyrie brains captured during autopsy. This explains why we've been able to stay one step ahead, Hayes said. They literally can't think outside the box. Exactly, Chen said. They conquered the galaxy because they're individually brilliant and collectively coordinated, but they achieved this by sacrificing adaptability. Every Valkyrie knows exactly their place in the hierarchy and operates within strict parameters. It makes them incredibly efficient, until they encounter something completely outside their experience. Like humans, Hayes said. Like humans, Chen agreed. We're chaotic, decentralized, and constantly improvising. Everything they're not. Hayes turned to the strategic display showing Earth and the current Valkyrie positions. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of genuine hope. Prepare the final briefing, she ordered. Operation Trojan launches in 6 hours. The command center of Valkyrie Occupation Force Earth was a marvel of alien architecture. Angular, efficient, and cold. Sub-Commander Vorax stood before the Supreme Commander, his posture perfectly rigid as protocol demanded. Explain this failure, the Supreme Commander said, his voice modulated to the precise tone that indicated controlled anger within Valkyrie communication standards. The human resistance was not present at the specified coordinates, Supreme Commander Vorax stated. Our intelligence was incorrect. Impossible. Our intelligence protocols are infallible. Evidence suggests the humans planted false information. Supreme Commander. The Supreme Commander's outer eyelids narrowed, a severe expression of disapproval. You suggest primitives have compromised our communication systems. This is beyond acceptable parameters of belief. Nevertheless, Vorax began, but was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout the command center. A communications officer spoke rapidly. Multiple impacts detected at perimeter defenses. Heavy weapons fire at all security checkpoints. Human forces have breached outer containment. The Supreme Commander rose to his full height. Deploy all reserve units. Initiate Protocol Severin 9. Reserve units are currently deployed to the Himalayan sector, Supreme Commander Vorax reminded him. For the first time in his 300-year life, the Supreme Commander experienced something approaching doubt. The humans had divided his forces and were now attacking his command center directly. A strategy so obvious it should have been anticipated, yet somehow wasn't. The humans cannot hope to defeat us, he stated, more to reassure himself than as a tactical assessment. Their technology is primitive, their numbers limited. Yes, Supreme Commander, Vorax agreed automatically, though his inner eyelids flickered with uncertainty. Outside the command center's reinforced walls, the sound of weapons fire grew closer. Hayes moved through the corridors of the Valkyrie command center, leading a strike team of 30 resistance fighters equipped with modified Valkyrie weapons. They had breached the outer defenses with minimal casualties, using tactics that exploited the Valkyrie's rigid response protocols. Central Command should be 2 levels up, she said into her comm. Team 2, status. In position at the power distribution hub, came the response. Ready to cut primary systems on your mark. Team 3. We've secured the landing bay. Their reinforcements can't dock, and our exit is clear. Hayes nodded to herself. So far, the operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Almost too perfectly. Stay alert, she warned. Remember, they may be predictable, but they're not stupid. And they're still deadly. Her team reached a massive door, the entrance to the command center according to the schematics they'd stolen. 2 technicians moved forward with breaching equipment, while the rest of the team took defensive positions. 30 seconds, one of the techs announced. Hayes checked her weapon. A modified Valkyrie pulse rifle. Its original biometric locks had been bypassed thanks to Dr. Chen's research into Valkyrie physiology. The weapon hummed with energy, ready to fire. Remember, we need the Supreme Commander alive if possible, Hayes reminded her team. He's our bargaining chip. The door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, and Hayes led the charge into the Valkyrie command center. What followed was chaos. Precisely the kind of chaos humans excelled in and Valkyrie couldn't process. Team 2 cut the primary power as they entered, plunging the command center into darkness for 3 crucial seconds before emergency lighting activated. In those 3 seconds, Hayes' team had already neutralized 6 Valkyrie officers using night vision equipment scavenged from Earth military bases. The remaining Valkyrie responded according to their training, taking defensive positions around the Supreme Commander, establishing firing lines, following protocols designed for infantry engagements. But Hayes' team wasn't fighting like infantry. They were fighting like humans, unpredictably, creatively, dirty. Some fired from prone positions beneath console banks. Others used captured Valkyrie shield technology to advance under heavy fire. 2 resistance fighters sacrificed themselves to draw fire away from Hayes as she closed in on the Supreme Commander. When the shooting stopped, 12 humans and 27 Valkyrie lay dead or wounded. The Supreme Commander stood surrounded by Hayes and her remaining fighters. Supreme Commander, Hayes said, her rifle aimed at his head. I believe it's time we negotiated terms. The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme stress in Valkyrie physiology. The Imperium does not negotiate with subject species. Hayes smiled thinly. Well then, I suppose we're about to make history. The tide turns. News of the human victory at the North American Command Center spread through the Valkyrie Imperium like a virus. Contained, quarantined, yet impossible to completely eradicate. For the first time in millennia, a Supreme Commander had been captured by a subject species. The implications were disturbing. In the Grand Throne Chamber on Valkyria Prime, Emperor Zorvex received the report with outward calm. His inner circle of advisors stood in perfect formation, arranged by rank and function as tradition demanded. This human resistance, the Emperor said, his voice perfectly modulated to convey authority without emotion, explain why it has not been crushed. High Admiral Kelvor, responsible for all military operations in the sector containing Earth, stepped forward precisely 2 paces. The humans demonstrate unusual adaptability, Emperor. Their resistance does not follow predictable patterns. When we adjust our strategies, they adjust faster. Unacceptable, the Emperor stated. No primitive species can outthink the Imperium. Dispatch the 7th Fleet. Reduce their cities to ash. Standard Extinction Protocol. The High Admiral hesitated, an almost imperceptible break in protocol that nonetheless sent ripples of shock through the assembled advisors. Emperor, I must inform you that the human commander has issued terms. She threatens to broadcast the technical specifications of our FTL drives to every corner of the galaxy if we escalate beyond current engagement parameters. The Emperor's outer eyelids narrowed to slits. How did primitives acquire such data? They captured it, Emperor, along with Supreme Commander Xelvac. Silence fell over the throne room, a silence heavy with implications that no Valkyrie wanted to voice aloud. These humans, the Emperor finally said, require closer study. 6 months after the capture of Supreme Commander Xelvac, the nature of the conflict had transformed. What had begun as a standard Imperial conquest had evolved into something unprecedented in Valkyrie history, a stalemate. Commander Hayes sat in the diplomatic chamber of Europa Base, facing representatives from 3 other species who had lived under Valkyrie rule for centuries. To her right sat Dr. Chen, now her chief advisor on alien affairs. To her left, the captured Supreme Commander Xelvac, no longer a prisoner but something more complex, a reluctant advisor. The Imperium has never faced this situation, Xelvac was saying, his once imperious tone now measured and thoughtful. Humans fight incorrectly. Hayes couldn't help but smile. You mean effectively. From the Valkyrie perspective, they are the same thing, offered Kalura, the representative of the insectoid Threxian species. Her translucent wings vibrated with excitement. For 8,000 years, all resistance followed patterns the Valkyrie could predict and counter. Until humans. The question, said the Morrigan delegate, a floating orb of condensed gas that pulsed with bioluminescence as it spoke, is whether this advantage can be expanded beyond your single world. Hayes nodded. That's why we've invited you here. The Valkyrie have withdrawn from direct engagement on Earth, but they're rebuilding their forces. The stalemate won't last. What do you propose? Asked the Felician ambassador, a reptilian being whose scales shifted color with his emotions, currently a cautious blue-green. Hayes activated the holographic display in the center of the table. The complete map of the Valkyrie Imperium appeared, highlighting key military installations, supply lines, and command centers. Thanks to the data we've extracted and Supreme Commander Xelvac's cooperation, we now understand the Valkyrie command structure completely. Their strength lies in rigid hierarchy and perfect coordination. Their weakness is their inability to process rapid, unpredictable change. We have known this for centuries, the Felician said, his scales darkening. It did not help us resist them. Because you tried to fight like them, Hayes said. Organized, hierarchical, predictable. We propose something different. Dr. Chen stepped in, highlighting different sectors of the map. A coordinated but decentralized resistance. Each world, each species fights according to their own strengths and cultural paradigms. No central command for the Valkyrie to target. No predictable patterns for them to analyze. Chaos, Xelvac said, and though his alien features were difficult for humans to read, Hayes had learned to recognize distaste in his voice. Organized chaos, Hayes corrected. The one thing the Valkyrie evolutionary path never prepared them for. The Morrigan delegate pulsed bright yellow, a sign of approval in their communication spectrum. The concept has merit, but coordinating such diverse resistance without centralized command, that's where humans come in, Hayes said. We'll provide the framework, the communication protocols, and the strategic guidance, but each species, each world determines their own tactics. And you believe this will succeed where millennia of resistance has failed? The Threxian asked. Hayes looked at Xelvac. Supreme Commander, if the Imperium faced simultaneous uprisings on 50 worlds, each following different tactical doctrines, how would High Command respond? Xelvac's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he considered. They would attempt to categorize the rebellions into known paradigms and apply appropriate countermeasures. And when those countermeasures failed, They would escalate force application according to standard protocols. And when those failed too, Selvak was silent for a long moment. Such a scenario does not compute within Imperium's strategic doctrine. Hayes smiled grimly. Exactly. 1 year after the first contact between Earth and the Valkyrie Imperium, the galaxy burned with rebellion. On 57 worlds across 12 spiral arms, subject species rose up against their Valkyrie overlords. No two rebellions followed the same pattern. The insectoid Threxians used their natural ability to produce complex pheromones to confuse Valkyrie communication systems. The gaseous Morrigans infiltrated life support systems on Valkyrie capital ships. The reptilian Felicians used their chameleonic abilities to wage guerrilla warfare unlike anything the Imperium had faced before. And coordinating it all, providing tactical guidance, communication protocols, and strategic direction, were the humans. In the war room of what had once been the Valkyrie North American Command Center, now repurposed as Resistance Central Command, Hayes studied reports from across the galaxy. The Valkyrie were responding exactly as predicted, applying standard countermeasures, escalating force when those failed, and ultimately falling into confusion when none of their established protocols proved effective. "We've received confirmation," Major Jackson reported, entering with a datapad. "The 7th Fleet has been recalled from the Cygnus Arm to deal with the Threxian uprising. 3 more Imperium dreadnoughts have been diverted from the Orion Spur to support operations against the Morrigan resistance." Hayes nodded. "And our operation?" "Strike Team Alpha is in position. They've infiltrated Valkyria Prime's orbital defense grid, awaiting your order." Hayes took a deep breath. What they were about to attempt was unprecedented. A direct strike at the heart of the Imperium itself. Not to destroy it, but to force a reckoning. "Give the order," she said. "Operation Paradigm Shift is go." Emperor Zorvex stood in the Imperial Observatory atop the highest spire of the Palace of Eternal Order, watching as fires broke out across Valkyria Prime's capital city. Around him, his most trusted advisors waited in perfect formation, though their perfect discipline was now marred by an unfamiliar emotion. Fear. "How did they penetrate our defenses?" he demanded, his voice still carefully modulated despite the unprecedented crisis. High Admiral Kelvor stepped forward. "They used unorthodox methods. Emperor, the humans provided tactical guidance, but each species contributed specialized capabilities that our defense systems were not calibrated to detect." "Unacceptable," the Emperor said, but the word had lost some of its power through repetition over recent months. A communication officer approached, maintaining perfect protocol despite the chaos. "Emperor, we are receiving a transmission. It is being broadcast on all frequencies, bypassing our encryption." Display. The observatory's main screen activated, showing Commander Ilara Hayes. Behind her stood representatives of dozens of species that had lived under Valkyrie rule for centuries. "Emperor Zorvex," Hayes began without preamble, "your forces are currently engaged in 57 simultaneous conflicts across the Imperium. Your 7th Fleet is pinned down in the Cygnus Arm. Your dreadnoughts in the Orion Spur are facing a rebellion they cannot comprehend. And now, resistance forces have penetrated to Valkyria Prime itself." The Emperor's outer eyelids narrowed to slits. "The Imperium has ruled for 8,000 years. It will endure this temporary disruption." Hayes smiled slightly. "Perhaps, but at what cost? How many more worlds will burn? How many more Valkyrie lives will be lost before you accept the inevitable? Which is change," Hayes said simply. "The galaxy is changing, Emperor. The old order, your order, cannot hold. You can adapt or you can fall. Those are your only options now." For the first time in his 3,000-year life, Emperor Zorvex felt something alien to Valkyrie psychology: uncertainty. "What are your terms?" he asked, the words strange on his tongue. "Independence for any world that desires it. A new galactic council with representation from all species, and the Valkyrie has equals, not conquerors." equals. The concept was nearly incomprehensible to the Emperor. The Valkyrie have ruled because we are superior. Our technology, our discipline, your inability to adapt, Hayes interrupted. That's why you're losing now. That's why you'll continue to lose, unless you change. The Emperor looked at his advisors, arranged in their perfect hierarchical formation, as they had been for millennia. Then he looked back at the human and the coalition of species standing with her, chaotic, diverse, unpredictable. The Valkyrie do not change easily, he said finally. Hayes nodded. No one does, Emperor, but the alternative is extinction. Not by our hand, but by the inexorable force of evolution. Adapt or die. That's the one universal law even the Valkyrie can't escape. In the silence that followed, the fate of the galaxy hung in balance. 10 years after first contact between Earth and the Valkyrie Imperium, Commander, now Ambassador, Ilara Hayes stood in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council on the neutral world of Nexus Prime. Around her, representatives of 117 species debated, argued, and compromised. A chaotic, messy, vibrant democracy, unlike anything the galaxy had seen in millennia. And among them, still formal, still rigidly disciplined, but present nonetheless, were the Valkyrie. Quite a change from when we first met, said a familiar voice. Hayes turned to find Selvak, the former Supreme Commander, now the Valkyrie representative to the Council. You've adapted well, she observed. Not without difficulty, he admitted. 8,000 years of biological and cultural evolution cannot be undone in a decade. But we are learning. Hayes smiled. That's all anyone can ask. The Emperor still maintains that this new arrangement is merely a strategic recalibration. Selvak said, his tone suggesting he didn't entirely believe it himself. Of course he does, Hayes said. Some things change slower than others. Around them, the Council continued its work, species that had once been bitter enemies now working together, learning from each other, growing stronger through diversity rather than conformity. There is one question that continues to disturb Valkyrie scholars, Selvak said after a moment. Oh, if humans had never been discovered, if Earth had remained isolated, would the Imperium have ruled for another 8,000 years? Hayes considered this. Probably not. Someone would have eventually discovered what we did, that your greatest strength was also your greatest weakness. That's the irony of evolution, Selvak. Nothing stays perfectly adapted forever. The environment always changes, and those who cannot change with it. Selvak began. Become extinct, Hayes finished. But the Valkyrie didn't. That's the important part. You changed. You adapted. You survived. Thanks to humans, Selvak said, with what might have been the Valkyrie equivalent of irony. Hayes shook her head. No, thanks to yourselves. We just showed you the door. You chose to walk through it. As the council session called to order, Hayes took her place among the representatives of a new galactic order, one built not on conquest and subjugation, but on cooperation and diversity. The galaxy was still dangerous, still filled with conflicts and challenges. But for the first time in millennia, it was also filled with possibility. And that, Hayes reflected as she looked around at the assembled species, was worth fighting for.